It was August of 1957, and a senator took the floor here in this very chamber. He'd had a remarkable record. He'd served as a Democratic senator, as a Dixiecrat senator, and as a Republican senator before he finally retired. And he served many years. In 1957, he was on the floor of the Senate to take his last stand. It was August, and it was a confrontation he had been preparing for a long time. He was a veteran of World War II, one of the few in the chamber at that time rather. And he was clearly a man devoted to his country and had shown real courage in serving as an officer in World War II. But his job on that day was to speak on the floor of the Senate for a long time. He'd been preparing for it. He'd taken daily steam baths trying to dehydrate his body so that he could stand on the Senate floor for a long time, even absorb fluids without needing to take a break to go to the restroom. He arrived for the battle armed with throat lozenges to stave off hoarseness, and he held the floor longer than any single senator ever has, even to this day. 24 hours and 18 minutes. For what principled purpose did this senator take such pains in preparation? For what noble reason did he grind the world's greatest deliberative body to a full-scale halt for more than 24 hours? In order to defend Jim Crow racial discrimination and deny equality to African Americans. Despite his efforts, the Senate would go on to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the first federal civil rights law in nearly a century since the Reconstruction. That senator, of course, was Strom Thurmond of South Carolina. This is how he described the Civil Rights Act of 1957 during his now notorious filibuster of that historic law. He said, and I quote, "I think the bill which is under consideration is unconstitutional. I think it's invalid. I think we are doing a useless thing." Well, Madam President, the truth was just the opposite. The blatant discrimination of Jim Crow laws was an affront to our Constitution, a stain on our national character, and a threat to our standing in the world. The Civil Rights Act of 1957, which Strom Thurmond filibustered, broke the death grip of Jim Crow on the American democracy and led the way a few years later to even more sweeping equality laws, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Today, nearly 65 years after Strom Thurmond's marathon defense of Jim Crow, the filibuster is still making a mockery of American democracy. The filibuster is still being misused by some senators to block legislation urgently needed and supported by a strong majority of the American people. There's one major difference now, though, when it comes to filibusters from the days of Strom Thurmond and his long-winded defense of segregation. Strom Thurmond had to sacrifice personally his comfort for his misguided beliefs. He had to actually speak without sitting on the floor for more than 24 hours to maintain his filibuster. In his day, if you sat down to take a rest or left the floor, the filibuster was over. Today, it's not the same. Senators can literally phone in a filibuster. All a senator has to do is to tell the staff working in the cloakroom what their intention is as to a filibuster, and then the message is delivered to the floor, and another bill is sent to the Senate's overflowing legislative graveyard. This is what hitting legislative rock bottom looks like. Today's filibuster has turned the world's most deliberative body into one of the world's most ineffectual bodies. We are like the giant in Gulliver's Travel, tied down by our own legislative red tape, unable to respond to crises and the clear wishes of the American people. Defenders of the filibuster will tell you that it's essential for American democracy. The opposite's true. Today's filibuster undermines democracy. By eroding people's faith in the ability of democracy to solve problems that matter the most, Misuse of the filibuster may accidentally open the door to autocrats, would-be dictators, who falsely promise to deliver results even if they ignore all of democracy's rules. To my friends who count themselves as proud members and supporters of the Federalist Society, I'm sure you've heard of it, go back and read the Federalist Papers. Read what the founders thought of the filibuster. They hated the idea. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, both penned passionate defenses of simple majority rule. Listen to what Alexander Hamilton had to say about the supermajority rule. What at first sight may seem a remedy is in reality a poison. Hamilton's own words. If a majority could not govern, Hamilton warned, it would lead to, quote, tedious delay, continual negotiation and intrigue, and contemptible compromises of the public good. Tedious delays, continual negotiation, and intrigue. Sound familiar? And then there's James Madison, the father of the U.S. Constitution, in Federalist 58. He wrote that if a supermajority were required to pass all new laws, quote, the fundamental principle of free government would be reversed. It would be no longer the majority that would rule. The power would be transferred to the minority. Hamilton, Madison, and other of our founding fathers debated and rejected the idea of supermajoritarian rule. They protected minority rights by creating a government with a president, 2 legislative chambers, and a judiciary, in which minority views were respected, and making a law, even with simple majorities, was a challenge. Rather than protecting the finely balanced system our founders created, today's filibuster throws the system out of balance, giving one half of one branch of government what amounts to veto over the rest of government. It promotes gridlock, not good governance. As I said, senators don't have to stand for even 1 minute to shut down the Senate. All they have to do is to threaten it, phone it in, catch a plane, go home from Washington, and come back Monday to see how their filibuster's doing. Mr. Smith phones it in. That wouldn't have been much of a movie, would it? Defenders of today's filibuster offer a second defense of the tradition. They say the filibuster promotes bipartisan cooperation and debate. Well, just look around. Can anyone really claim that we are living in the great age of Senate debate? Last year, calendar year 2020, in the entire year, 12 months, we considered 29 amendments on the floor of the Senate. 29. Quite an improvement over the previous year, 30% improvement. The previous year, we considered 22 amendments on the floor of the Senate. I'm not counting these votorama spectacles. That's not much of a debate. It's not much of an amendment process. 60 seconds on a side, that's a great debate? Not by my definition. The truth is, as filibusters and threatened filibusters have increased in recent decades, real debate and bipartisan cooperation have plummeted. Today's filibuster is often used to prevent the Senate from even starting to debate important ideas. It's not the guarantor of democracy. It has become the death grip of democracy. Senator Thurman's 1957 filibuster marked only the 5th time since 1917 that the Senate had voted to cut off any measure. I want you to reflect on that for a minute. We had had 5 filibusters in 5 decades when he took the floor in August of '57. Guess what? We can have 5 filibusters in 5 days now. They've become so common. So how did the filibuster become a weapon of mass destruction? The answer is we stumbled into it. The filibuster was a mistake to begin with, and it's gotten worse over time. As many of our colleagues know, when Congress first met in 1789, the House and the Senate rule books were nearly identical. Both rule books allowed a simple majority to cut off debate on any proposal by invoking what was known as a previous question rule. The House still has that motion. The Senate eliminated the previous question rule by mistake in 1805. The change came at the suggestion of Vice President Aaron Burr, who was fresh off of his trial for killing Alexander Hamilton, and who was later tried for treason. Burr, presiding over the Senate one day, skimmed the rule book and suggested the previous question rule be dropped. He reasoned, we hardly ever use that rule, so why is it necessary? Thus, the filibuster was born, not as a sacred constitutional principle, but an offhanded clerical suggestion. There were few filibusters before the Civil War. After the war, filibusters remained rare, used exclusively to deny African Americans their basic constitutional rights. The first major changes started in 1917. The Senate adopted what's known as Rule 22, the cloture rule, allowing the Senate to end debate with 2/3 majority vote. Fast forward to the 1970s, two more changes in the filibuster. First, senators changed the rule to allow more than one bill or matter to be pending on the Senate floor at a time. Before this, a filibuster really literally brought the Senate to a halt. The creation of this two-track system allowed the Senate to take up other matters while the filibuster continued, at least theoretically. In 1975, the rules were changed again, requiring just 3/5 majority, 60 votes, not 67, but 60 votes to end a filibuster. Suddenly, the filibuster became relatively painless, for senators at least, and the number of filibusters exploded. From 1917 to 1970, the Senate took 49 votes to break filibusters. 49 votes in that period of 53 years. That's fewer than one a year. Since 2010, it has taken the Senate on average more than 80 votes a year to end filibusters. Filibusters, or so-called motions to proceed, now regularly prevent us from even discussing proposals supported by the strong majority of American people. The modern filibuster has broken the normal legislative process. It was never an essential or even intentional part of democracy, and now it rules the Senate. Over the last 20 years, I've faced a 60-vote requirement to move a measure which is very important to me and to hundreds of thousands of people in our country. It's known as the DREAM Act, the Bipartisan DREAM Act. It was introduced so that we could give to young people who were brought to this country as infants, toddlers, and little kids by their families a chance to earn their way to a path to legalization and citizenship. 5 times since it was first introduced, the DREAM Act has been stopped by a filibuster. Twice in 2007, once in 2010, twice in 2018. In each instance, the DREAM Act received a bipartisan majority vote but was blocked by a minority of senators. Their opposition prevented the Senate from even debating the measure. It was repeated rejections of the DREAM Act by a minority of senators that finally moved President Obama to establish the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. To our Republican colleagues, let me say this. If you don't want to see this president or any president impose solutions based on executive orders, shouldn't we be willing to debate the issues at hand and consider actually legislating? I've been long open to changing the Senate rules to restore the standing filibuster. If a senator insists on blocking the will of the Senate, he should at least pay the minimal price of being present. No more phoning it in. If your principles are that important, stand up for them. Speak your mind. Hold the floor and show your resolve. Others have proposed different reforms, including the reducing the number of votes needed to invoke cloture, creating a tiered system of voting in which a filibuster can be broken with successively smaller majorities, and ultimately a simple majority. Some have suggested that we forbid filibusters of bills that pass out of the committee with bipartisan support. I support discussing any proposal that ends the misuse of a filibuster as a weapon of mass destruction. If the Senate retains the filibuster, we must change the rules so that any senator who wants to bring the government to a standstill endures at least some discomfort in the process. We need new rules that actually promote debate. They are long overdue. Close with one thought. My first job in the Senate was a college intern for Illinois Senator Paul Douglas. Paul Douglas was an extraordinary man, PhD in economics, war hero, champion of honest government, and a passionate supporter of civil rights. In 1957, he was actually on the floor when Strom Thurmond was giving his historic filibuster. In a bit of ingenuity, Paul Douglas asked that a pitcher of orange juice be placed on the desk next to Strom Thurmond's desk. He hoped that thirst and the call of nature might force an end to that shameful filibuster. Well, it didn't work. Likewise, it'll take more than orange juice these days to bring an end to the filibuster as a weapon of mass destruction. It's time to change the Senate rules. Stop holding this Senate hostage. We cannot allow misuse of arcane rules to block the will of the American people. I urge my colleagues to defend democracy by making the changes needed.